ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to SF Live. I'm your host, Myrna Lim. Tonight we have a very special guest, a filmmaker, producer from the San Francisco Bay Area, who has built a very good reputation in completing a documentary called Valor with Honor. It's a story of the 442nd Regiment, comprising of Japanese U.S. citizens who are fighting side by side with the U.S. citizens in Europe. Ladies and gentlemen, the filmmaker, Mr. Burt Takeuchi, grew up thinking and wondering about the Asian history in America and how he could put that into a moving film. He had appeared in several films, in theaters, and now this special documentary. Hi, Bert, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Thank you so much for coming and joining us. So tell us how you became interested in putting together this film, this documentary.
The intention was to actually make an independent film on the 442nd, but at that time I wasn't really as tech savvy, and video cameras have come a long ways. They're not quite where they are now. And so the idea was to capture as many of these stories on video as possible and write as many down as possible before many passed away.
It's an excellent film. Let's see. Talk about some of the challenges you've had, and we'll see if we can play this.
Mostly it was just getting the equipment together and getting it to work properly.
Right.
Thanks to Apple computers, it made things a lot easier with their Final Cut Pro software.
Right.
But I think the most difficult part was getting the veterans to talk about themselves. It's not something that Asian American people like to do very well. They like to talk about we as a group, and it's not as individuals. So that was a huge hurdle to get over, and to convince the veterans that it was a worthwhile project.
And how long did it take you to work on this project?
It took about 3 years. It was done in fits and starts. It wasn't just a straight. I didn't go all the way through, just straight through. It was sometimes it was very frustrating, but for the most part it was very rewarding. I thought it was a great experience. I'm glad I finished it, and I hope that people can get something out of the film.
My first reaction was, they can't do that to me. I'm an American.
Like professional photographers.
You see plenty of cows get all bombed and everything, all dead upside down. They all bloated, see? I mean, you don't see like but the pug there. Mostly all the houses were knocked off already.
You're always getting artillery fire, small arm fire. You're going forward, moving every day. They're waiting for you, and you're going to have to dig them out.
Especially the condition of those poor guys, you know. Skin and bones and nothing, hardly any clothes on.
That's wonderful. So this is airing all over the country now?
Just limited screenings.
Right.
Like this but we'll continue to show the film probably in the Bay Area next. That's our next goal. San Jose and probably San Francisco and back down to Los Angeles.
Okay. And you're going to New York with this?
Right. This week, November the 9th, tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, and Wednesday, we'll be at NYU, and then Hofstra on November the 10th.
Well, let's talk about a lot of the veterans. Are they still alive, a lot of them?
There's only maybe, I think 400 left out of maybe 18,000 that served in World War II.
Wow.
Right. And I think those 18,000, most of them were in the 442nd 100th Battalion,
okay.
But another 5,000 to 6,000 were sent to the Pacific, believe it or not. And they were called the MIS, the Military Intelligence Service.
Wow.
And their job was to, not so much cracking the Japanese code, but I guess trying to interpret it. Also to interrogate prisoners and read documents, captured documents, so they can turn them around, translate them very quickly, and send them to the headquarters for military intelligence for. So they would always know, the U.S. military would always know what the Japanese military was doing almost before the battle started.
Jesus,
yeah, that was a pretty amazing thing. But it was a secret, it was top secret for 50 years. And they were not allowed to talk about it until, I guess, into the 1970s. So the story kind of slowly came out until recently. But many of them, some of them were still around, but most of them had to keep quiet because some of them were still working for the government, believe it or not. They actually worked for the CIA and for military intelligence.
Well, it's kind of what's so interesting in this time period would be the fact that during that time, the Japanese Americans are being put in internment camps.
Right.
Here in California mainly, right? And they're
all over the United States.
All over the United States.
In the Deep South.
So that's what's happening on the one hand. And on the other hand, you have Japanese Americans who are fighting the war with the U.S. Army.
Right.
And then at the same time, you have the Japanese government who was in collusion with Hitler and Mussolini and so forth. So you have these three levels. It must have been extremely difficult for the average Japanese family, particularly Japanese Americans at that period, because of the distrust, and yet at the same time you're expected to fight side by side. And what did you learn from your own family in terms of how you interpret that whole confusing time?
I mean, I think most of the veterans and many people I've interviewed or had conversations with about World War II, it was a confusing time. I mean, but of course they were very young too.
Right.
And I like to think of them as more college bound. Many wanted to go to college, and that was definitely interrupted by the war.
Right.
But the thing was, it's kind of funny for them because I think the Nisei especially, the second generation, the American-born Japanese, thought themselves as Americans. They didn't think themselves of anything else because many have never been to Japan. Only a very few went to Japan.
I mean, it's like with me. I mean, I was born in the Philippines, but when somebody asked me, "What are you?" I'm an American. I'm a Filipino American.
Right.
With Chinese, roots.
Right.
So you don't. After you've been here for 30 years, 40 years, you are it.
Right, and of course they're young too. They're only 19, 20 years old. That generation, yeah, they were or teens. They were like maybe 16, 17. So
were they drafted or did they
some were drafted
volunteer,
before the war. Some volunteered before the war. It's called a pre-war draft in 1940. So some were already in the Army or the National Guard.
Right.
But when this regiment was being formed, it was being patterned after the 100th Battalion, and the 100th was the Hawaiian National Guard unit that was sent over first.
Right.
Yeah, they were all from Hawaii, all Japanese Americans from Hawaii, and they were very brave. They were very daring. They took a lot of objectives that other units had trouble taking, but they were taking huge casualties. They started off with 1,000 men, and they were down to less than 500 walking in less than a few months. Right. So they were called the Purple Heart Battalion.
Wow.
And they were the predecessor to the 442nd.
Right.
And I think it really opened the door up for other Japanese American units, because they felt that they could be trusted now, that they were going if they could fight that hard, then they wanted more.
Right.
Right. Because other units and other generals didn't trust the Japanese at first. Well, how can we trust them? That type of thing, right? And General Mark Clark was the commander of the Fifth Army. And he says if they're going to, he was from California, and he lived in Northern California for many years.
Right.
I think he was the general at the Presidio for a couple of years also. Yes. And so
okay.
he had no problems with Japanese Americans. He said, send them over. Give me all you got. And that's what he said. So he was willing to accept the 100 Battalion and eventually the 442nd as Japanese American troops. But the Fifth Army was full of foreign troops. I mean, it was it was no problem to him. He had troops from India, Maori troops from New Zealand, English soldiers, Canadians, French, Africans. I mean, just it was a multinational army, even though it was under American command. So why not have Japanese American soldiers? And they were very brave in Italy. They were very daring. They were chasing the Germans all the way up to the northern part of Italy, and then they were sent to France to help out the push into the French. I think it's called the eastern part of France.
Yeah.
The Vosges Mountains, they called it.
Okay.
It was very thick, very dense, very almost impenetrable. I mean, the trees are so close together. And when it got dark, you couldn't even see from me to you. So somehow
that is scary. Have you ever been in that situation?
The scary forest. That's true.
Exactly. Well, you're supposed to be wearing white shoes so you can see.
Well, he just what happened was there was a regiment that was pushing ahead toward the German border. They're right on the border of Germany, France and Germany, and the German resistance was stiffening up. They weren't running anymore.
Wow.
Yeah, Hitler said, gave commands to his handful of units there. Says, hold your ground and fight to the last man. And so they were going to do that. They were going to try and do their best to stop people, the Allied forces, from invading Germany.
Right.
And so what happened was one battalion from the 36th Division from Texas got too far ahead. They moved so far ahead, they actually were surrounded by the Germans. They might have even let them in just to close them in, so they tightened a noose around them.
Oh, wow.
And they were stuck inside of the middle of a German division, or German regiment, I think. And they were just stuck there on top of this little hill.
Wow.
They tried to radio out, and they tried to break their way out, and they couldn't do it. So the 442nd was ordered to go in and get them out. So they had to fight 6 miles to this impenetrable forest under enemy fire, like from hill to hill, ridge to ridge, tree to tree. They had to fight day and night for 5 days to get them out. So when the battle ended, they lost about 800 men.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, just to rescue these 230 men off this hill. So when you read about the presidential citations, and part of the reason that the Nisei were getting the Japanese Americans were getting the Congressional Gold Medal is partly because of this battle, because they fought, under it was an amazing feat to do for one regiment to break through. Because I think they were about to give up. They were about to give up, and there's no way they'd get them out. But the 442nd broke them out. But they had to break through the German lines. But it wasn't just by outflanking anybody. They had to go straight ahead, hill to hill. Just bayonet charges the whole way, and the fighting was almost day and night.
Right. Now, did you finance this documentary yourself?
Mostly, but I had help from friends. So they're like an executive producer. They're just good friends that help me with the project, equipment, software, guidance to how to save money.
It's hard.
Yeah, it's very hard, but
it's a labor of love,
But it's not impossible. I mean, if you really want to do it, you can. It's just that it's not going to look like Hollywood quality movies, because they're incredible looking.
Yeah.
But I think it's capturing these stories, saving these stories for another generation.
Oh, exactly.
And for historians and researchers.
Yeah.
I think it accomplished that. So I'm very proud of this film.
Well, it's like with the Filipino World War II veterans. My dad was, and finally, the U.S. government acknowledged them, and they were in to some sum of money. But my God, it's not, by the time that happens, the majority of them are already dead. I'm probably the same age as these Japanese veterans.
Yeah, the Filipino soldiers were a little bit older, I think. They were probably like 25. Some of them were 30, believe it or not. They were 30-year-old men, but they wanted to go fight. And these two regiments, the 1st and the 2nd Filipino infantry regiments, they trained in Camp Roberts, I believe, in Northern California. And one of their special weapons was the bolo knife. Because I guess maybe some already knew how to fight with it. I don't know, but maybe they were guys that were had some jungle fighting and said, "Hey, this is a good weapon to fight with." So there are pictures of these veterans fighting with these bolo knives.
And the Japanese did not have the samurai.
Well, I suppose, but there was a lot of hand-to-hand fighting in the jungle, so it's a good weapon, and it's a good machete too. So it's like a tool that they used, and I've read a little bit about them. I've only met a few veterans.
Right.
Yeah, but I see them walking around in the farmers market in San Jose.
But these Japanese veterans, I mean, they're from all over the country. You interview them from all over the place.
I tried to get as many from Hawaii and California as possible. I didn't have a chance to go further north into Oregon and Washington. I wish I did.
Right. But
the opportunities weren't there at the time. So I had enough in California, northern southern California, and the Central Valley.
Yeah.
And many from Hawaii.
How did they react seeing themselves?
I think they liked it. I think they liked watching themselves on film.
Exactly, I would imagine so.
And many enjoyed the film very much. I thought they felt it was. I felt good because I think they felt it was a worthwhile effort. They didn't feel their time was wasted. I'm sure there's many other people that started projects or they said they were and approached them and nothing ever got completed. And that's the great thing. You actually finish your project and then you can share it with the veterans and their families.
That's a great idea. What do their families have to say?
I think the families liked it. I think they were kind of shocked. See, what happens is that in a lot of families, the veterans don't share these stories with their family members. They just keep it to themselves come up with a funny story here and there.
Right.
And it's tough for them to talk about things like that because war is terrible, especially those that fought a lot of in combat. It's not everybody fights in combat. Only a fraction of the army does.
Right.
But the ones that have been fighting in these terrible battles, like I was describing, like the Lost Battalion Rescue and some of the fighting in Italy, some have nightmares. They have post-traumatic stress, and they had a hard time adjusting to civilian life. And that's something that's happened to all soldiers over time, but definitely not World War II. But
post-traumatic
right. Stress, post-traumatic stress. It's going to be something, an issue for soldiers in this generation coming back from the Middle East.
I mean, it's like the Japanese occupied the Philippines, right? And, my parents, my mom, she's 91 now, and they would still talk about it, how the Japanese would invade the house and stole the chickens. She was really mad about those chickens.
Yeah, it's survival. That's where your protein comes from. And they're your pets. So some people come in, these soldiers come in and do that.
Right.
Yeah, that was kind of interesting. The soldiers that were in Italy and France, they didn't steal.
They didn't?
No, the Nisei didn't steal. They paid for it, or they would trade. They didn't do things like that. Because they weren't an invading army. They were a liberating army. That was their intention was different.
Right. It's different. Yeah. Right. Exactly.
And they also knew, I think, that they had to be on good behavior because people were watching them.
Exactly.
Right. So they I think that's the attitude that they had.
Right.
There was one story where there was a veteran from Watsonville, and his name is Henry Arao, and he told me that he was with the 100th, but he was from the mainland. He's Japanese from the mainland, and they got off the truck to take a stretch. They were stretching out, and they looked. Oh, look, cabbages! Right, so they run up this hill. This whole company's running up the hill, and they're ripping these cabbages out of the ground. And they were gonna make tsukemono out of it, like a cabbage, like a salted cabbage.
Yeah,
they would chop them up and they would massage it in their helmets. make it with a brine or a salt broth, like a pickled cabbage, to have with their meals. And this farmer is just angry because he turns around. It's bare. The whole field is bare. They took every cabbage out of that field. So the captain got very angry at the men and said, "Hey, you guys can't steal." And they go, "Oh, you know." So they all coughed up a few dollars each as punishment, and then they gave it to the farmer. So he made out okay. But that's probably the closest I ever heard from stealing.
Anyway, I mean, 22 minutes goes so fast. So, do you have like a schedule for your screening in the Bay Area so folks could, and where do they go to find out more about?
They can look at www.valorwithhonor.com, or we're also on Facebook, and you can get information about the next screening and information about the film itself. And my email is there, so if you have questions about the film or about the 442, you can email me at torasonfilms@yahoo.com.
Right. How do you spell that, Torasan?
Torasan, Torasan, films with an S, at yahoo.com.
Great. So, are you enjoying your life as a filmmaker?
Well, it's a part-time life. I have a full-time job, and
That's great.
I give my I put my heart and soul into it when I have the time. But I definitely I enjoy it. I enjoy being a filmmaker.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us, and for Burt to sharing with us this wonderful, wonderful documentary. And it's been a fascinating conversation. I learned a lot tonight about American history, Asian history. It's always a learning process. And please watch his documentary. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thanks, Burt. And ladies and gentlemen, good night.